My name is Scott Meacham, and I have the honor of being the moderator today, and maybe the challenge, we'll see, the honor and the challenge of being the moderator today. I think it's interesting that I was selected to be moderator of this panel on ethics and happiness, given the fact that in my career I've been a lawyer, a politician, and a banker who sometimes don't get the credit that's due us for being ethical people. I give you a little bit of my background. I graduated from law school and went and practiced law with my dad in a family law firm in Clinton, Oklahoma, and was the fourth generation of Meacham lawyer in the family practice in Clinton, and thought I'd do that the rest of my life. Until at the ripe age of 28, I got elected to go take over the family bank in Elk City and ran the bank for 12 years and thought I'd do that for the rest of my life. Until my best friend from law school, a guy named Brad Henry, got elected governor and twisted my arm and talked me into coming and being his, originally his state finance director and his secretary of finance and revenue, and eventually became state treasurer. Now, I always knew I wasn't going to do that for the rest of my life. But it was certainly an interesting and fun 8 years. I left that and went to Crowe Dunlevy and headed up their banking and financial institutions practice group until a few years ago I got the opportunity to take over the president and CEO of I2E, which is if you hadn't heard I2E, we actually invest in and help assist startup companies in Oklahoma. We are a not-for-profit that operates under a contract with the state of Oklahoma to provide assistance to start new businesses and commercialize new technologies in Oklahoma. I tell people I'm still a little bit of a nights and weekends lawyer, but my day job is president and CEO of I2E. Now with that, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. I have the enviable task of trying to keep 3 college professors on track and on time. I'll let you, but I will jump in where necessary. But let's start by I'll have each of you introduce yourself. We'll start with Dr. Harvey James, and then Kathy, you, and then Steve, you last. Okay, so just give us a brief introduction, and then we'll jump into the topics.
My name is Harvey James. I'm a professor at the University of Missouri, and I do a lot of research in the area of ethics.
Hi, I'm Kathy Terrell, and I'm from the University of Central Oklahoma, where I'm a professor of accounting and the chair of the accounting department. And it's nice to be here again with all of you. I come from a practice background for the first half of my career, and then it got overlapped with teaching, and I've spent the last 28 years teaching at UCO. And I also work with our ethics team, and we highly value ethics, and it's a good place to be.
And I'm Steve Agee. I'm the Dean of the Minder School of Business and a Professor of Economics at Oklahoma City University. I've just started my 6th year as Dean at the Minder School. Before that, I was a executive in the oil and gas industry for 24 years. I ran a company based here in Oklahoma City from 1982 to 2006, at which time we sold that company right before the Great Recession, which was very lucky. But it's a pleasure to be here. I can tell you with certainty there's nothing more important than your integrity. In any line of work, whether you're in business or academia, there's nothing more important than that. So it's a pleasure, and I appreciate, Shannon, you invited me to be a panel member here today. Thanks.
So here's the ground rules. We have 4 topics that the panelists are going to cover today. That means, if I'm doing my math correctly, panelists, you each have 3 to 4 minutes on each topic. Don't make me jump in, because we do want to get through everything, because I think we have some really good things to talk about today. I will call on you each after I introduce the topic and let you give your presentation. So our first topic is entitled, Does Ethics Matter? And really what we're looking at it is from a human standpoint. You know, what difference does it make whether you're ethical or non-ethical? And I think we have some really good information to present. And Dr. James, I know you've done a lot of research in this area, so would you like to kick it off?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very grateful to be here. I personally believe that there is a connection between ethical behavior and happiness. And since we're in a group of ethically minded people, I suspect we've got the happiest people in Oklahoma City here, right? Let's begin with a few definitions. Happiness, what does happiness mean? Happiness means a feeling of contentment, peace. That differs from euphoria. Euphoria is excitement. Euphoria tends to be somewhat temporary. Happiness tends to be somewhat long-term. If you win the $1.4 billion jackpot, I suspect you'll experience euphoria. But the question is whether that turns into happiness, right? What is unethical behavior? Unethical behavior means doing something you know, believe, feel, or expect is wrong, or that harms others or the system. And so the question is, can you behave unethically? Can you do things that you know that are wrong? Can you lie, cheat, and steal? And can you be happy at the same time? That is ethical behavior necessary for happiness? And so that's been a question of interest to me personally. I believe you cannot be happy if you're engaging in ethical behavior. I've engaged in some research on this. There's a lot of research on happiness. We'll learn more about that a little bit later in our presentation. But a lot of interest in this notion of happiness and what causes happiness. I conducted a study a few years ago, a cross-country study, looking at the question of relationship between ethical behavior and happiness. I don't have, or was not able to get data on ethical behavior. That would be really nice. I get to have the next best thing, which is ethical judgments. That is, you're given a scenario that is clearly a situation of unethical behavior, and then the question that's asked to respondents is, do you think this is acceptable or unacceptable? And so there's this an ongoing study that's been going for about 20 years. It's called the World Value Survey. It's cross-country and it involves almost a little more than 80 or 90 countries. And respondents are asked a wide variety of questions, including some questions about ethical scenarios and how acceptable they think they are. They are also asked how happy they are and how satisfied they are with their life. And so I looked at the data and controlled for various things and found what I expected and hoped to find, which is that there is a very nice correlation between the expression of ethical judgments, that is, saying something is wrong when it really is wrong, and the stated satisfaction of people. And looking at the data a little more, it's one question you can ask yourself is, well, maybe happy people tend to engage in more ethical behavior. If you're unhappy, that's going to lead you to unethical behavior. And the analysis didn't really point to that. It pointed the other way around, which suggests that people who have ethical judgments tend also to express greater satisfaction with life.
Thank you, Dr. James. So I believe Dr. Terrell is going to share with us some data on the geography of happiness.
That and on some things that cause people to become unethical. Excuse me. One of the problems that we have in America is television can be a pretty hard master, from the standpoint that a lot of people watch TV and they see people who have lots of money. Every family is is good, or they're really bad, or whatever. But people tend to look at television lifestyles that are beyond their means. And anytime you begin living on above your means, you have a high risk for committing some kind of fraud. And so it's important that people have a realistic financial approach to their life. Hopefully they're realistic in other areas of their life too. But when you put that pressure to do more and spend more, and you obligate yourself for things that you absolutely cannot afford, you're going to have a crisis at some point. Most of the financial pressures come from lifestyle living. On some of the pages from 6 to 12, I have some slides from the ACFE, which is the Association for Certified Fraud Examiners. And pressure, the highest level of pressure comes from too high a living standard. And when you have that, the second one is you have financial problems. Those are the two main causes of people to do things that are absolutely unethical and illegal. But things that people don't think about sometimes can become frauds, and that is applying for credit cards for which you know you can't pay the money. You don't have enough income to do it. Even if you get a raise in income, what do? You step up your standard of living. And so we see that, frequently. And a lot of people can declare bankruptcy, but that doesn't always solve your problems. And so it also sets you up to steal from your employer. So how do you steal from your employer? 85% of frauds are frauds with your employer, okay? And some people don't think about this. If you're surfing the web, if you're on Facebook, you are robbing your employer of time. That time costs them money. And so you have to look at things like that. Cheating a little bit on your entertainment and travel expense reports. Using your company gas card to fill your wife's car or your spouse's car. Those are things that are unethical. And once you cross that threshold, it's easier and easier to do the next one. And so those are things that are really, really important. The average incident in 2014 for theft from an employer cost the employers $130,000 per person. And the longer it goes, the worse it is. So you have to really consider that. And then what happens is if you get caught and you lose your job, then you're really in a pickle, because there's no way for you to get another job easily unless you lie about it. And I'll give you another example. When I was in practice many years ago, when our economy was pretty good here, I had two families that we dealt with. One was an elderly family. This person had never made more than $10,000 a year, and he had CDs that totaled $300,000. Had another family who lived in Quail Creek, drove a big fancy car, husband had a good job, they made a lot of money, they made at least $100,000 a year. And those were the days when you could deduct interest, which we can't do anymore, except for homes. And they didn't own their house, their income from dividends and interest was zero, and they owed every single store in Oklahoma City that was on the north side of town. Now, which of those do you think had a happy life? And you have someone who doesn't have to worry about anything. They lived in a 900 square foot house that probably cost $10,000 when it was built. They were happy. The other family always had to outdo their friends, and I don't think they were happy people. They didn't act like happy people. But that's such a dichotomy, you think about it. So I love financial literacy. We don't do enough of that. We have students who are in college, they've never written a check, do not have a bank account. The only thing they know is a card they can swipe and mom and dad will pay for. Please don't do that to your children, okay? All right, I'll stop there.
So Dr. Agee, do you want to share some sort of practical stories and examples with us?
Well, sure. In my career, which is now in the, I guess, the fourth decade, I've encountered a lot of problems with ethical behavior, fraudulent behavior. In economics, of course, we teach always that more is preferred to less. I think everybody wants more. And so this contributes, as Dr. Terrell pointed out, to part of the problem. You know, we're always seeking some higher level of income or status or whatever it may be. I looked at the data. I like the data that you both constructed here. And I have two real quick stories to tell you about some of the experiences that I've encountered with respect to what I call fraudulent behavior. Now this is in addition. You've all read about the Volkswagen case last year, okay? You've read about, of course, Enron's an old story now, Bernie Madoff's an old story. Stuart Parnell, has anybody heard of Stuart Parnell? Ran a peanut company in Georgia. Google him, Stuart Parnell. You'll learn about his ethical behavior. But here closer to home, there's two incidents that I'll relay to you, and they both occurred at the university. This wasn't in my private life or my business experiences in the energy industry, although I have stories to tell about that too. But we had a staff member working at the university that was embezzling money. Embezzling money when this individual worked in the president's office and then moved over to development and then actually worked for me in the dean's office at the Minder School of Business and was very clever about how this was handled, taking a few $100s here, a few $100s there, getting cards that they could use on their own or give as gifts, and over the years this amounted to over $100,000 before this individual was caught. Now, of course, the repercussions are never good when you're caught because this person went to prison. Okay, this was actually an offense that the FBI got involved in and prosecuted, and this person was incarcerated and had to pay restitution. So, you know, when something like that happens and you're caught, the outcome is never good. So that's obviously a disincentive for behavior like that. That goes to the living beyond your means, okay? So, which is on, if you look on page 12 of the handout, you'll see these red flags based on, this is based on gender. This person happened to be female, and so it looks like, which is surprising to me that more females than males are listed here. That was an interesting statistic that I wasn't expecting. The other story I have to tell very quickly about deals, I would classify this as excessive pressure, because at the university we require publication. In the business school you've got to publish. It's not really publish or perish, but it is publish. And so we want our faculty to publish in journals. And we had a faculty member that we just found out last year had plagiarized some research and had submitted it for publication, and that had been approved for publication until we found out about it. And normally you find out about incidents like this when someone else sees it, reads it, reports it. So one of the questions I know we'll talk about during our discussion today is, what do you do when you're notified about a situation that's not right, this unethical behavior? So I was brought information by a faculty member about this plagiarism case, and I looked over all the information and I did my own investigation. I took it to our general counsel's office at the university. It made it up to the provost's office, and then a decision was made to call that individual in, confront them about it, do some additional digging, and the result over a period of time, over due diligence in terms of the process, was termination. This was a tenured faculty member that was terminated from the university because of that incident. So we try to enforce ethical behavior for everybody, including our students and our faculty, and we try to treat everyone the same way, and we will not tolerate instances like that. So just a couple of situations actually that I've seen personally during my tenure as dean.
Thank you very much, Dr. Agee. So if we're ethical, we can expect to have a better, more fulfilled, and healthier life, and the decisions we make every day can impact how we feel and the ethical decisions we make of how we experience our lives. So, but from looking at the other side of the coin, from kind of a business side, and business dealing with the issues of and the costs of unethical behavior, of corruption, and those types of things. I know, Dr. A.J., again, you've had a lot of life experience. Now, you're kind of like me. Your guys had a lot of jobs. And you have some examples to share with us of businesses dealing with corruptions in overseas markets.
I do. I teach a master's level class in energy management at Oklahoma City University, and I just started this class, the 9th cohort of this master's class last night, in fact. And I invite guest speakers, mostly CEOs from the various energy companies, into my class to speak. And last year I invited Mike Stice. Mike Stice is the former CEO of Access Midstream Partners, and before that it was Chesapeake Midstream Marketing. Before that he worked for ConocoPhillips, and he was overseas a lot with Conoco, running their Asian operations. So last year he told my class this story about when he worked for Conoco overseas in Indonesia. And the national oil company in Indonesia is Pertamina, and the government at that time when he was there was controlled by Prime Minister Suharto. The government worked under a tax royalty regime where the offshore licenses for oil and gas leases were competitively bid, and the winners were selected based on their compliance with the terms in the country and the highest bid, of course, which you'd expect. Now, Mike was the vice president of Conoco in Asia Pacific, living in Singapore at the time, and they had an in-country manager residing in Jakarta, responsible for the bidding and winning access to offshore licenses for oil and gas. Now, the unwritten process was to be invited to a social event, and Mike said in his case it was a golf match or a round of golf with the Director General of the government responsible for energy leases. And during that golf match he was informed that they were one of 2 finalists in the competitive bidding process, which they'd already submitted, and that money was requested to expedite the granting of the license. So he, on behalf of Conoco, elected not to participate in that. They said, no, we're not going to do that. And they lost the license. Soon after that, the Suharto government was overthrown, and the new government dealt very harshly with this type of behavior and rewarded Conoco with a new license over the party that had been paying the bribes. And he also said, moreover, the other party was forbidden from ever participating in future bids. So you see, that kind of behavior over time is probably not a good idea, even in international markets, although we know it occurs.
Thank you very much. Dr. James, you want to share with us on this topic?
Look, the question is, does ethics matter? And typically when we talk about this to a group of business professionals such as you, we try to make the case that ethics is good for business. But the reality is that sometimes it's not. Sometimes it actually pays to behave unethically. Ethical issues arise whenever there is a conflict of interests, values, or rights. Interests are things we care about. We care about eating, we care about working, we care about sleeping. Values are things that are important as an end in themselves. All right, so we may value wealth or prestige or integrity. Rights are entitlements. And whenever interests, values, or rights conflict, we have ethical problems. And these conflicts can be within ourselves. So we may want to get promoted, get tenure in a university, but we know we need to publish. And so we have this internal constraint about trying to, how to do that in a way that does not, create, conflicts of interest, values, or rights. As I mentioned previously, I think ethics matters not only in business, but also for personal. But there's also a global, much broader collective implication. And consistent with my interest in this kind of a question, I conducted a study that looked at the question of whether the economic growth of countries depends upon the ethics of people in the country. So I collected data on the growth rates of about 80 countries over a 20-year period. I used the same data set that I explained previously, that those cross-country people were asked their ethical attitudes. I used that data to create a measure of something that I call generalized morality, which simply is the percent of people in a country that believe that various ethical attitude or ethical situations are in fact wrong when they're supposed to be wrong. And I looked at the correlation between the percent of people in this generalized morality measure and economic growth. And I found something rather interesting. In countries that have relatively weak institutions, economic institutions, so there's political corruptions, the court systems are weak, it's very difficult to start up businesses and so forth. In countries with weak institutions, economic institutions, there is a very strong correlation between the generalized morality of people, how ethical people are, and economic growth. In fact, over this 20-year period, the difference in growth rate in countries, in countries that have people with high generalized morality compared to low generalized morality is over 1%, which is not trivial when you're looking at compounding and growth rates over a period of time. In countries that had relatively strong economic institutions, I could not find a very strong effect of ethics. And I suspect that's because it's kind of hard to determine why people behave ethically in situations when there are courts and when you can get caught and so forth. Are you ethical because you're afraid you're going to get caught and sued? Or are you ethical because it is the right thing to do? And so I'm still trying to tease that out in the case of more developed countries. But the finding that ethics matters when economic institutions are relatively weak, I thought was important and in fact quite meaningful.
Thank you very much. Dr. Terrell, do you want to share with us?
Yes, I'm going to back up a little bit what you said with the World Happiness Report from 2015. And if you look on page 6, there's a map of the world. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it in color, but it's still pretty decisive when you look at it. The #1 country was Switzerland for happiness. #5 was Canada. #15 was USA. But if you look at the map, it's very clear that North and South America and Australia are, and then the very tip of Northern Europe are the happiest countries in the world. And they probably have less population in several other instances. They have 6 factors that they felt like contributed the most to what made people happy. The first of that was the GDP per capita for that country, which talks about prosperity. Healthy years of life expectancy, social support, and that was social support from the government, from others, etc. Trust as measured by a perceived absence of corruption within the country, again what you talked about, and perceived freedom to make life decisions, and generosity. Now that one surprised me. Generosity meaning how many people in that country are generous to others. So again, how much do people contribute? And so those were the things that made the most difference. The 3 top ones of that was social support, incomes, and healthy life expectancy. So if you think about it, when you have security, you tend to be happier and you're not worried all the time. So I thought those were interesting. That World Happiness Report you can look up. It's about 129 pages, something like that. And it was edited by John Hallowell, Richard Layard, and Jeffrey Sachs. And so you have to think about that. So if you're in a community that is more prosperous, do ethics fail when you have one that's not? And as measured by, again, this happiness report, it indicates that the higher level of income throughout the economy of an area creates a little bit more happiness. So then we have a problem like we're in today. What happens when there's a decline? And so you have a lot of decisions that employers have to make. You have a lot of decisions that individuals have to make. And so you wonder what this does to trust, to GDP per capita, and to generosity. We all know that when times are good, people are more generous, and when times are bad, they're not. So I think those are things that we have to think about. Are you a happier person because you have money? Not necessarily, but you may be able, well, some people that have a lot of money spend it all, like I talked about the one client I had. But it's one of those things that when everybody has a decent level of income, then it's good. And one thing I'd also like to point out too, that people who get raises, if they don't have good financial concepts, they only get into more debt. So if you take additional income and save it, that's when you begin to start having better concepts for money and how to use it.
Thank you, Dr. Terrell. So now it gets really interesting. So all this talk about ethics, is it really just a matter of convenience or inconvenience, depending on how you look at it? So what do you do when the price of oil is at a 12-year low? Or what about, like Dr. Agee said, when all your competitors are doing it? Does that make it okay for you? Or, you know, we talk about bad times, but there's a perfect case study of the failure of ethics and the consequence of it in good times. If you want to go to the movie theaters today and go see a movie called The Big Short, look at that. It's a great case study of good times and the systematic, all the various levels of ethics and all the tripwires that failed, and then the global economic impact of that. So again, this time we'll start with Dr. James. Dr. James, you want to share with us, again, a little bit of more of your research?
Yes, I actually conducted a study that deals directly with the question, what if other people are doing it? This particular study involved work with farmers in Missouri, and I asked them various questions about various ethical practices and unethical practices, and asked them about how justifiable they think they are. But I also asked them how prevalent they think these various practices are. And I found something interesting. That is, the more that people, in this case farmers, believe that a particular unethical practice was done by others, the more tolerant they were of that practice, but of a certain type of ethical problem. There are different kinds of ethical problems. So in this particular study, I distinguished between two. One is ethical problems that create harm on others. So in the case of farming, if you are misusing chemical fertilizers, for instance, can cause some environmental harm. There are other problems that are unlawful. So they're wrong not because they cause harm, but because they either prohibited by law or by social norms. It is the social norm law type of ethical problem in which I found this correlation between how tolerant people were of unethical behavior and how prevalent they thought. In other words, if I think everybody else is engaging in unethical behavior that is either unlawful or violates social norms, then I'm more willing to think it's okay. That's what my study was able to find. And I think that this points in part to the problem of rationalization. I think one of the roots of unethical behavior is rationalization. We rationalize because we think other people are doing it. We get our social cues from others. And that might tell us that it's okay because others, and even if I'm discovered, since other people are going to do it, I'm not going to be as socially sanctioned as probably I otherwise would be. We also rationalize because we may mistakenly think that greater economic prosperity, more money, the more acquisition of stuff will make us happier. But what is happiness? I'll go back to the definition I started with at the beginning. Happiness is contentment. And so if you are content, then you're going to be happy. Now this kind of goes against the economic assumption that we assume that people want more, they're not satisfied. And so we always want to acquire more. And so the problem is really one of rationalization. And we think that getting more stuff is going to make us more content. Now, greater economic prosperity, more money, may make us more content if we don't have to worry about financial things. But if more money creates more problems for us, or if we believe that problems will disappear if we can get more money, then we may rationalize unethical behavior. So it's the rationalization part that is the problem. But as I believe, and some of the research that I've been looking at seems to suggest, engaging in unethical behavior doesn't make people happier. And so we've got a conflict. You engage in unethical behavior, you feel bad, you need to cover the guilt and the shame and the remorse and the regret that you're feeling. And you think, okay, I'll just get more stuff. Getting more stuff is going to make me overlook or not feel as bad, but that's not the case. And you get this this sort of snowballing kind of a problem. So rationalization is really a big problem. Don't rationalize. If you find yourself starting to rationalize, then that's a red flag.
Thank you very much. Dr. Terrell, do you want to, of course, none of us do we have to worry about in this room being likely to commit unethical behavior, but who do we have to be careful for, and what are the temptations?
I agree a lot with what Dr. James talks about. If you look on page 12, there's a list of red flags based on gender. And I think what is maybe surprising to you is that frequently it's done more by women than men. But I think there's some reasons why this happens. First of all, women steal for their family. Men tend to steal for vice, babes, booze, and bookies, okay? And that's just common in the fraud literature. And so when you look at this, sometimes you can understand why women do more of these things. First of all, women tend to make 2/3 of what men make for the same jobs. That's maybe okay, but not okay, all right? So men tend to control more money than women from that standpoint of income. Notice that things that take a lot of boldness, like the third one down, unusually close association with vendors or customers, men are much more likely to do that than women, because that's overt stealing, overt collusion, and stuff like that. As you go down the list, control issues, women have more difficulty with, or that do it a lot more, and they try to get more control because they don't feel like they have control. If you look at divorce and family problems, if women get the children, who has the greater burden? And that typically is true. A man who loses his wife will have more difficulty than a woman who loses her husband, but women still get the brunt of a lot of those. Addiction problems, that one surprised me a little bit, but I think the reason may be because women probably take more medicine and they probably get addicted more to painkillers than anything else, and they can't cope with it. As it goes down the road, some of the lower ones, some of the women do not do that quite as much. One of the problems that we have is you need to have systems within your organization that prevent this from happening. And all the accountants in the room know that we've had internal controls completely crammed down our throat for the last 15 years. But it's true. The more controls you have, the harder it is for people to commit fraud with their employers. And so that's a very important consideration. Then we have the issues of credit cards and things like that. I can remember as a newlywed having to go through hoops to get a gas card. Couldn't get one from Texaco or Conoco, so we had to go to Kerr-McGee. Kerr-McGee was local, and so they would let us have a credit card just for gasoline. And you could not get credit cards if you were a student. Now they sit in some of the universities and pass them out. They're happy to give people credit. They've got to assume they're going to have large losses because the students will not do that. At our university, about 10 years ago, we had a student who got one of those free credit cards, ran up $7,000 in bills in about 3 months, and committed suicide. That ended any credit. For a long time, you couldn't even pay your tuition with a credit card. So it's one of those things that you have to look at both sides of issues, and giving students a credit card with no credit limit is an invitation for them to be in trouble. And they don't realize they're in trouble, but they don't have realistic expectations of what it takes to do that. So I think I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, I was a beneficiary of being able to look at all this research that my colleagues have done. So I was blessed to be able to take a look at this before I sort of conclude my comments for the day. And when I looked at the data, I looked at this issue of other people are doing it. This was the topic. This is the particular topic for this. And I recalled a story from a book that I actually used in a class one time, Freakonomics. How many of you have read the book Freakonomics by Stephen Dubner and Steve Levitt? Okay, so you may remember this story about the Bagel Man. So this is a story about a man named Paul Feldman. This is a real, true story. Feldman actually was an agricultural economist, and he wanted to tackle world hunger. But instead of tackling world hunger, he went to Washington analyzing weapons expenditures for the United States Navy. This was in 1962, and he spent the next 20 to 22 years doing this sort of work. He held senior level jobs and earned good money, but he wasn't always recognized for his best work. At the office Christmas parties, colleagues would introduce him to their wives, not as the head of public research group, which he was, but the guy who brings in the bagels. The bagels had begun as a casual gesture, a boss treating his employees whenever they won a research contract, but then he made it a habit. Every Friday he'd bring some bagels, a serrated knife, and some cream cheese. And when the employees from neighboring floors heard about it, they wanted some too. Eventually, he was bringing 15 dozen bagels a week. In order to recoup his costs, he set out a cash basket and a sign with the suggested price. His collection rate was about 95%. He attributed the underpayment to oversight, not to fraud. In 1984, when his research institute fell under new management, Feldman took a look at his future and grimaced. He decided to quit his job and sell bagels. His economist friends, and I'm sure I would have been one of these, thought he had lost his mind, but his wife supported him. So he quit, and he started driving around office parks that encircle Washington, soliciting customers with a simple pitch. Early in the morning, he'd deliver some bagels and a cash basket to the company's snack room. He'd return before lunch to pick up the money and any leftovers. It was an honor system, commerce scheme, and it worked. Within a few years, Feldman was delivering 8,400 bagels a week to 140 companies and earning as much as he had ever made as a research analyst. He had also, quite without meaning to, designed a beautiful economic experiment. From the beginning, Feldman kept rigorous data on his bagel business. So by measuring the money collected against the bagels taken, he found it possible to tell down to the penny just how honest his customers were. Did they steal from him? If so, what were the characteristics of a company that stole versus a company that did not? Under what circumstances did people tend to steal more or less? As it happened, Feldman's accidental study provides a window onto a form of cheating that has long been stymied by academics, white-collar crime. We seldom have good data on white-collar crime. When he started his business, he expected 95% payment rate based on the experience he had in his own office. But just as crime tends to be low on a street where a police car is parked, the 95% rate was artificially high. Feldman's presence had deterred theft. Not only that, but those bagel eaters knew the provider and had feelings, presumably good ones, for him. A broad swath of psychological and economic research has shown that people will pay different amounts for the same item depending upon who is providing it. Feldman learned to settle for less than 95%. He came to consider a company honest if its payment rate was above 90%. He considered a rate between 80 and 90% annoying but tolerable. And if a company habitually paid below 80%, Feldman might post a heckling note like this one. The cost of bagels has gone up dramatically since the beginning of the year. Unfortunately, the number of bagels that disappear without being paid for has also gone up. Don't let that continue. I don't imagine that you would teach your children to cheat, so why do it yourselves? So what did the bagel data have to say? There have been two noteworthy trends in the overall payment rate. The first was a long, slow decline that began in 1992. By the summer of 2001, the overall rate had slipped to about 87%. But immediately after September 11th of that year, the rate spiked a full 2%, and it hasn't slipped much since then. So this bagel business of Feldman's really lies at the very intersection of morality and economics. And a lot of people stole from him, but the vast majority, even though no one was watching over them, did not. And this outcome may surprise people, especially some of his economist friends. They counseled him that the honor system scheme would never work. But it would not have surprised Adam Smith, who many of us consider to be the father of modern economics. In his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he made the following statement: "How selfish soever man may be supposed," Smith wrote, "there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it." And I'll conclude by this story that's referred to in your program, the Ring of Gyges, which comes from Plato's Republic. A student named Glaucon offered the story in response to a lesson by Socrates, who, like Adam Smith, argued that people are generally good even without enforcement. Glaucon disagreed. He told of a shepherd named Gyges who stumbled upon a secret cavern with a corpse inside that wore a ring. When Gyges put the ring on, he found that it made him invisible. With no one able to monitor his behavior, Gyges proceeded to do woeful things, seduce the queen, murder the king, and so on. Glaucon's story posed a moral question. could any man resist the temptation of evil if he knew his acts could not be witnessed? Glaucon seemed to think the answer was no. But Paul Feldman sides with Socrates and Adam Smith, for he knows that the answer, at least for his case, was 87% of the time it's yes. So my concluding thought is most people are honest most all the time. But thank goodness there's auditors, Todd, that keep the others in check.
Great. That's a great story, Dr. Agee. So our last topic is, what can you do as an individual? I think that oftentimes the hero of the modern corporation is the person that will stand up and say, wait a second, we ought to take a look at this. One of my former lives, I was a plaintiff's attorney, and you would see some email strings that you would just be in shock that something like that could go through an organization and no one would stand up and say, wait a second, maybe we should pay the state of Oklahoma royalties on this payment we received. So, I think in our last few minutes, and we only have about 7 minutes left, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to kind of share any practical ideas you have as far as what individuals can do to promote integrity at work. So let's start with you, Dr. Terrell.
I think one of the best things you can do is communicate. You have to communicate not only your ethical standards, but you have to communicate and bring everyone into the conversation. If you set the tone at the top, which we all know is important, if you set that tone, you can't just put a memo out. You can't just hang a sign. Remember, Enron was famous for their wonderful ethics statement that hung on their wall. It was huge, it was long. And you have to have people sign that ethics oath frequently, maybe once a year. You have to encourage others to speak up when the sniff test doesn't work. In other words, when they see a yellow flag or a red flag, they need to have a hotline that they can call. Hotlines have improved the amount of fraud that's been found throughout an organization. And one of the other things is too about this. You never know who in your organization may have the right solution to any problem. And if you don't communicate within an organization, people kind of get off into the side lights, and that's when they have an opportunity to do something that's not good, or they do it because they're hurt, or they're angry, or they feel like they have no say in anything. So I would say communication is important. That's why I love these meetings. We get to talk about it, think about it, where otherwise we probably would not. So it's one of those things that if you communicate about it, if you behave ethically, you want to make sure that everyone else is doing the best they can to do so.
Dr. Agee?
Yeah, I would say if you're in charge, if you're the boss, so to speak, pay attention to what's going on. Listen to your subordinates. Communication, as Dr. Terrell said, is really critical. You've got to be responsive, be open, be transparent. Allow your subordinates to come to you and be open about it. And don't be punitive or don't sanction them for reporting things that might involve unethical behavior. If you're a subordinate, be honest about what's going on. If you see something that's not right, you should report it. Just like one of the faculty members at my university came to me about this plagiarism issue. And I appreciate that. I want that open, honest transparency. And that person was never identified subsequently. That individual was never identified because it wasn't that person's fault that was going on. So when we took it to the general counsel and the provost, nobody knew who reported this to me. You have to be aware, you have to listen. If you are working for someone and you see something, speak up about it, okay? That your boss will appreciate that. So I just encourage open communication, transparency.
Dr. James?
Well, since ethical problems arise when there is a conflict of interest, values, or rights, And when these create pressures, we got the situation in which we need to be concerned about. And I really like that page 12 of your handout that lists all the behavioral red flags. And if you look at that, you can see where pressures and conflicts are quite apparent. And so what does this suggest? Well, it suggests identifying conflicts, mitigating them, minimizing them, and then helping people deal with pressures. We all deal with pressures. We all have pressures that we face, and some people seem to deal with them better than others. And so it's important that we recognize when we're facing ethical pressures, and identify different releases for those pressures, so that instead of having them lead toward unethical behavior, compounded with our rationalizing that it's okay in this particular situation, we try to mitigate the pressures by releasing them through other kinds of activities.
Thank you very much. I'd add that, if you're senior management, I think a lot of it is making doing the right thing a core value of your organization. And if you're an employee and not senior management, and maybe have an organization that doesn't have those values, you have to have the courage of your convictions. And with that, can we give our panelists a little round of applause for their time today? Thank you very much, and I think we're right on time.
Great job. Really appreciate all that you did to make this program a success. I know a lot of research went into it, but what I got from this is happy, principled people are prosperous. I like that. Anyway, we'll see you next month for positivity. Find out why that is the new business term that you need to know. See you then.